Okay, so today we're diving into something that I think a lot of people can relate to, even if you haven't personally experienced it, and that's teacher burnout.
Yeah.
We've got a great piece of research to help guide our conversation, an appraisal perspective of teacher burnout, examining the emotional work of teachers
By Malin Cham.
by Malin Chang, exactly.
Yes.
I think we all know someone who's a teacher, or maybe you've even felt this yourself, like just what it feels like to be emotionally drained
Right.
by your work. So our mission today is really to unpack what the research says about why teachers experience this so intensely,
Yeah.
and also what it tells us about managing emotional strain in any demanding job, because I think a lot of these concepts
I think,
apply way beyond just the classroom.
yeah, that this is something that, you know, even if you're not a teacher, you've probably felt some of these things in your own work, whether it's tight deadlines or, just those difficult interactions with colleagues or clients. That feeling of just emotional exhaustion. And the concepts we're going to talk about today, like emotional labor and how we actually mentally process stress,
Right.
they're surprisingly universal.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there, right? Where you just feel like you're at your wit's end.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start with really defining what teacher burnout is, because it's more than just being stressed, right?
Right. It is more than just stress.
No, what's the core difference?
So the research highlights that, early on, burnout was really understood as this state of emotional depletion, a real lack of motivation and just feeling absolutely exhausted. And then we had the Maslach burnout inventory, the MBI,
LEI. Yeah.
come along, and it gave us a more structured way to think about it, identifying these three key dimensions.
Okay, so 3 dimensions. So let's break those down so we really understand what's at play here. So the first one is emotional exhaustion.
Yes.
And that sounds pretty straightforward, but what does it actually feel like? If you were to describe it to someone who's maybe never experienced it.
It's that feeling of being completely emotionally stretched thin.
Yeah.
Like you've just given it all, you've got nothing left.
Right.
Imagine trying to pour water from a pitcher
Yeah.
and it's completely empty. That's kind of the daily experience.
You're depleted.
You're depleted. Yeah, you're depleted of the emotional resources that you need to really connect and engage with your work and with the people you work with. And it's often the most noticeable sign for people, in the lives of teachers who are experiencing burnout. This is the one that really kind of sticks out.
Right. That makes sense, like running on fumes, but emotionally.
Exactly.
Okay, so the second dimension is cynicism, or sometimes it's called depersonalization, and that sounds a bit more like detached or
It does, yeah.
cold almost.
Like-
So what's at the essence of this aspect of burnout?
It's really about developing this negative, almost callous attitude towards the people that you work with. And for teachers, of course, it's going to be students and colleagues. And, it can really be seen as a sort of psychological defense mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
a way to create distance when you just feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, like you got to protect yourself somehow.
Exactly. It's a way to protect yourself emotionally.
So it's almost like you putting up a wall.
Yeah, a bit of a wall.
Okay, so the third piece then is inefficacy, or a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So
Yeah.
what does that look like, in practice?
This is really when teachers start to feel like their efforts don't really matter anymore,
Yeah.
like they're not having a positive impact. And that sense of achievement, that feeling of accomplishment in their work, it just diminishes. So you have this combination, feeling emotionally drained, feeling disconnected from your work, and then feeling like you're not making a difference.
Yeah.
And that's really a key insight to recognizing these three signs, together.
Yeah. That's a really powerful way to summarize it, but the research also points out that it's not necessarily a permanent condition.
That's right.
So, it's not like once you're burned out, that's it, you're done.
Yeah, sometimes I think that the term burnout can kind of, make people feel like it's this endpoint, but that's not always the case. And for some teachers, especially mid-career teachers, burnout can be a temporary phase.
Yeah.
And sometimes something like engaging in professional development that's really revitalizing, that they find, meaningful and helpful,
Yeah.
that can actually help them reconnect with their passion for teaching and, move back to that more engaged state.
So it can be like a step back to kind of reassess
Exactly.
and move forward in a different way.
And it's also worth noting that, teachers can report feeling emotionally exhausted, but still be satisfied with their job overall. So it's not this, black and white.
Yeah, it's nuanced. Yeah?
Exactly. It's very nuanced.
It's not like, okay, burned out equals I quit.
Right.
It's a lot more complex than that.
It is much more complex.
So let's dig into the why behind all of this. Now, early research focused on two main things when it was trying to figure out, what causes burnout the individual teacher, and then the school environment.
Right.
So the first one, focusing on the individual factors, like are there certain types of people that are more susceptible to burnout?
Exactly. Are there, demographic factors at
Yeah.
play? Is it age, gender, experience? But, the interesting thing was that the findings in this area were often inconsistent.
Mm.
They didn't really give us a clear picture.
Mm.
But certain personality traits, like if you tend towards anxiety or you're very self-critical, those did show a stronger link to burnout.
Which makes sense if you're already, carrying a heavier emotional load.
Yeah,
To begin with, that a stressful job would then kind of amplify those tendencies.
exactly.
So then the other side of that coin was the organizational factors.
Yeah.
What is it about the school environment
Yeah.
that leads to burnout?
Right. What are those external pressures?
Mhm.
And a lot of those were the kind of obvious ones, like an excessive workload, large class sizes, lack of support from administrators and colleagues, or just a negative school climate in general.
Right. So really feeling like the system is working against you.
Yeah, absolutely. And early models, they're like the demand control model, really highlighted the combination of having these very high job demands
Hmm.
and then a lack of control over those demands or a lack of resources to cope.
Right.
That can be a significant driver of burnout.
So those are kind of the external forces, but
Yeah.
the research that we're focusing on today, Chang's work, really emphasizes a shift to what are called transactional factors.
Yes,
So it sounds like it's really about the interplay between the teacher and their environment.
exactly. It's really moving beyond just looking at, are there individual traits that make you more vulnerable, or are there specific things in the school environment that cause this? It's really looking at this dynamic interaction between the teacher's perception
Yeah.
and the reality of their work environment. And this is where the emotional aspect really starts to come into focus.
Yeah.
Because it's about how teachers interpret the events that they encounter.
Okay, so it's not just what happens, it's how you process what happens.
Exactly.
So how do these interpretations or appraisals, as Chang calls them, how do they actually contribute to burnout? What's the mechanism there?
So a really good example of this is how teachers interpret student behavior.
Okay.
We know from research that disruptive student behavior is a major stressor. It's one of those, big things that teachers have to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
But Chang's argument is that it's not just the behavior itself,
Uh-huh.
but the teacher's underlying beliefs and cognitive appraisals of that behavior that make a difference.
Oh, so it's like, why does one teacher, manage a challenging classroom relatively well,
Exactly.
and then another teacher is just completely depleted?
Right. Why do those differences exist when on the surface, it looks like they're dealing with the same kinds of challenges?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that suggests that, our own internal mental framework
Absolutely.
is really playing a huge
That
role.
plays a huge role, yeah.
And so that brings us to this idea of the emotional work of teaching, which is something that often gets overlooked.
Yes. Despite this clear link between emotions and burnout, the emotional demands of teaching haven't always been a central focus in the research. But we know teaching is inherently emotional.
Cool.
Think about it. All the feelings that teachers experience on a daily basis.
Mhm.
The joy when a student finally understands that concept, the frustration with constant interruptions, the pride in a student's progress.
Right.
This constant engagement with emotions requires so much mental energy.
Yeah.
It's a lot of emotional labor.
And emotional labor is a term that we've heard before, often in the context of like customer service roles where you're having to constantly, put on a happy face,
Yeah.
even if you're not feeling it.
Exactly.
So how does that manifest specifically in teaching?
Well, teachers often have to really consciously manage their own emotions in order to connect with their students to maintain a calm and professional demeanor to create that positive learning environment.
Yeah.
They might be feeling stressed or overwhelmed, even angry,
Yeah.
internally.
Right.
But they need to project patience, encouragement, understanding, and this disconnect between what you're truly feeling
Uh-huh.
and what you have to outwardly display is what's called emotional dissonance.
Okay.
And research shows that this is a significant predictor of emotional exhaustion, constantly having to suppress or kind of fake your emotions.
Yeah. It's like you're constantly swimming upstream
It is, yeah.
against your own feelings.
It takes a toll. It takes a real toll.
So, and the article also mentions, how intense these emotions can be, especially for teachers who are just starting out.
Yes.
Okay.
Those early years of teaching are often so intense emotionally. There's the anxiety about gaining the respect of your students. There's the vulnerability to judgment, from your colleagues, from administrators.
Right.
And then just the pressure of constantly making decisions, on the fly.
It's like trial by fire almost.
It can feel that way. Yeah.
And it's not just managing your own internal state. the research highlights specific things that happen
Yes.
that lead to these unpleasant emotions.
Yeah. So beyond, just dealing with challenging student behavior, difficult relationships are a major factor, whether that's with students who are resistant or disrespectful,
Yeah.
or colleagues, where there's conflict, or administrators who are perceived as unsupportive.
Right. So just feeling isolated or undermined.
Exactly. That can be so draining. And then, additionally, the stress associated with things like school reforms, especially when these changes are poorly communicated or they feel imposed or they create a lot of instability,
Yeah.
that can be a huge source of negative emotion.
So a lot of these triggers seem to involve this lack of control,
Yeah.
feeling unsupported or like your effectiveness is being threatened in some way. So now to really understand how all of this translates into burnout, the article goes into this thing called appraisal theory.
Yes.
So can you give us kind of the core idea behind that?
So appraisal theory suggests that our emotional responses are not directly caused by the events themselves,
Okay.
but by our interpretations or evaluations of those events.
Mm.
And these are called appraisals. And so it's about the meaning that we make of what's happening.
Okay.
And the intensity of our emotional reaction depends on how we judge the significance of these events.
Uh-huh.
And this is where we get into these primary and secondary appraisals.
Okay, so primary appraisal, that's our initial, almost like automatic assessment.
Exactly.
So what is that in the context of a teacher, experiencing a challenge?
So primary appraisal has two key components.
Yeah.
Relevance and goal congruence.
Okay.
So relevance refers to how significant is this event, to my well-being, to my goals.
Okay.
So for a teacher, if you've got a student who's constantly disrupting the class,
Yeah, that's going to feel pretty relevant.
it's going to feel very relevant.
Yeah, to your ability to teach.
Exactly, because it directly impacts their ability to teach and manage the classroom.
Right.
Goal congruence is about whether the event is helping or hindering my goals.
Okay.
And in this case, the disruptive behavior is clearly hindering the teacher's goal of creating that productive learning environment.
Right.
And so the more relevant and goal incongruent an event is perceived to be, the stronger that initial emotional response is going to be.
That makes sense, because if something feels really unimportant,
Right.
or it's actually helping you achieve your aims, you're probably not going to have a strong emotional reaction
Exactly.
to it. Okay, so now we've made that initial assessment.
Right.
What happens in the secondary appraisal stage?
So in secondary appraisal, we kind of go a bit deeper and we evaluate our ability to cope
Okay.
with the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So this involves several factors: accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Who do we believe is responsible for what happened?
Yeah.
Do we blame ourselves? Do we blame the student?
Mm-hmm.
Do we blame the system? Coping potential. How capable do I feel of dealing with this effectively?
Right.
And then future expectancy. What do I anticipate will happen moving forward?
Okay.
And it's these secondary appraisals that really shape the specific emotion we experience
Okay.
and how intense it is.
So let's take that example of the disruptive student again.
Yeah.
So, the primary appraisal might be, this is constantly interrupting my lesson goal, incongruence. It's happening all the time, relevance.
Yes.
And then secondary appraisal might be, well, this student is deliberately trying to cause trouble. So that's accountability, blaming it on someone else.
External accountability.
External accountability.
Yeah.
I feel like nothing I do makes a difference. So that's low coping potential.
No coping potential.
And this is probably going to continue to be a problem. So negative future expectancy.
Negative future expectancy, yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for a really negative emotional experience.
It is. It's a perfect storm
Yeah.
for, experiencing some of those really unpleasant emotions.
So, and the article goes on to explain how these specific appraisals can actually lead to the specific unpleasant emotions that teachers often experience
Yeah.
and contribute to burnout. So let's take anxiety, for example. We know that anxiety in teachers, can be triggered by feeling unprepared or dealing with classroom management issues. How does appraisal theory shed light on that?
Yeah, so, anxiety often comes up in situations where there's a lot of uncertainty and perceived lack of control.
Yeah.
So if a teacher feels unprepared for a lesson,
Right.
low coping potential.
Right. About their ability to actually teach.
Yeah. or they're anticipating, potential discipline problems and they don't feel equipped to handle them,
Yeah.
that can very easily trigger anxiety.
Right.
The fear of being judged by students or parents or administrators also kind of plays into this.
Yeah, that uncertainty.
Yeah, that uncertainty and lack of control over your professional standing
Okay, what about frustration and anger? Because those also seem like pretty common emotions
are very common, yeah.
in a demanding job, like teaching deaf. So how does appraisal theory kind of differentiate between those two?
So frustration often arises from, external obstacles and a feeling of being blocked from achieving your goals and coupled with that sense of low control.
Okay.
So think about, dealing with excessive paperwork or
Stop
bureaucratic.
it.
Yeah, the red
Yeah.
tape, exactly. Or, constantly changing administrative mandates.
Mhm.
So you want to do your job, you want to teach your students,
Right.
but you feel like, the system is making it really difficult.
Right, you're hitting roadblocks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that can lead to a lot of frustration. Anger, on the other hand, is more likely when a teacher appraises an event as intentionally harmful or undermining their goals and attributes it to another person. So an example would be, a student who is perceived as deliberately misbehaving or a colleague who acts in a way that feels disrespectful.
Right.
So the key difference is often in the appraisal of agency,
Okay.
who is seen as being in control and responsible for this negative event,
Mm.
and whether there's this sense of injustice.
Yeah, like a violation.
Yes, a violation of expectations.
Mm.
And that often kind of tips it over into anger.
Okay. And then there's guilt, which might be a less obvious emotion
It is, yeah.
to connect to burnout, but the research suggests that it does play a role.
Yeah, it can definitely play a role.
So how does that fit in?
So guilt is often this self-directed emotion.
Mhm.
It rises when teachers feel responsible for their students' well-being and their academic progress, especially when students are struggling.
Right.
So if a teacher feels like they haven't done enough to support a particular student,
Hmm.
this can lead to feelings of guilt.
Right. So it's that, I should have done more.
Exactly.
Could have done more.
Yes. And, this is often tied to that strong sense of moral and professional obligation that a lot of teachers feel.
Right. Like, I'm here to help these kids.
Exactly.
Oof.
They hold themselves to a high standard of care and they can feel personally responsible when things don't go well.
Right. So
Mm.
all of this really highlights how burnout isn't just about these external stressors. It's really how we process
It's very much about how we process.
and react to them internally.
Exactly.
So that brings up the question, what can we do to actually mitigate burnout? What does the research suggest?
So the article really points to the importance of emotion regulation
Okay.
and coping strategies.
So if our appraisals drive our emotional response, then learning to kind of manage
Exactly.
those appraisals and the resulting emotions is key.
It's key to preventing burnout, yeah.
So emotion regulation, as the article discusses, it's really those processes that we use to influence the emotions that we experience and how we express them. And a big part of this is, self-regulatory knowledge. So understanding your own patterns
Yes,
and how you process information.
absolutely. And, the research highlights two main approaches to emotion regulation: reappraisal and suppression.
Okay, so what's the fundamental difference between those? And, does the research suggest that one is better than the other?
Yeah, so reappraisal involves actively changing how you think about a situation in order to lessen its emotional impact. So, for example, instead of, immediately interpreting a student's disengagement as disrespect,
Mm-hmm.
a teacher might try to reappraise it as, okay, maybe the student's struggling with material or they're facing challenges outside of school.
Oh, okay.
So you're kind of reframing.
Reframing it.
Exactly. You're reframing it in a way that reduces that negative emotional charge.
Yeah.
Suppression, on the other hand, is about inhibiting the outward expression of your emotions.
Okay.
So it's like putting on that brave face, and the research really indicates that reappraisal is a much more effective strategy in the long run.
Interesting.
Yeah, suppression might offer, temporary relief, but it doesn't actually change the underlying emotion.
Right. So you're just kind of stuffing it down.
They're stuffing it down, and it
Ugh.
can even be really cognitively draining,
Oh, wow.
which can actually make burnout worse.
Okay, so like trying to keep the lid on that boiling pot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might seem like it's working in the moment,
Yeah.
but it can actually make things worse in the long run.
Okay, so what about coping strategies? Because, emotion regulation is kind of how you're processing those things internally,
Yes,
but then coping is how you're dealing with it behaviorally.
exactly.
So how did those fit into the picture?
So coping involves, consciously identifying your feelings and then choosing specific strategies to manage them. And so you can think about coping efforts as being problem-focused, which aim to directly address the stressful situation itself,
Mm-hmm.
or emotion-focused, which aim to regulate your emotional response to
Okay.
the situation.
Yeah.
And then you have avoidance coping strategies,
Like denial.
like denial,
Yeah.
distraction,
Just checking out.
checking out. And those are often linked to, higher levels of stress and burnout because you're not actually dealing with,
You're not addressing it.
you're not addressing the core issue.
Right.
But the article also introduces this idea of proactive coping,
Right.
which I think is really interesting.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So this shifts the focus, from just reacting to problems
Yeah.
to actively planning for future challenges.
Okay.
Setting goals, it's more of this forward-thinking approach to managing stress and building resilience.
So it's kind of like, okay, I know that this is going to be an issue down the line.
Right.
So how can I kind of build in support systems
Exactly.
or, coping strategies ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not just waiting for the crisis to hit.
Exactly. It's about taking control and being proactive.
Okay. So all of these insights, into appraisal and emotion regulation and coping, the article suggests that this has implications for how we actually train and support teachers.
It does, absolutely. Teacher preparation programs have a really vital role to play here in equipping, future educators with the skills to navigate the emotional complexities of this profession.
So not just, here's how you teach math, here's how you teach history,
Absolutely.
but also here's how you deal
Here's how you deal with yourself,
with the emotional realities.
with the emotional realities of this job.
This is job.
And it starts with, really explicitly teaching them that teaching is inherently emotional work.
Right.
Normalizing the experience of a wide range of emotions,
Mm-hmm.
both positive and negative, and encouraging them to really develop self-awareness by, identifying their own emotional triggers and the appraisals that set them off.
Okay. So building that emotional literacy
Yeah, building that foundational emotional literacy
from the beginning.
right from the start. Yeah.
And then what about specific strategies and techniques?
Mhm.
What should teacher education programs really be emphasizing?
So, they should be actively teaching and practicing,
Hmm.
effective emotion regulation techniques, particularly those reappraisal strategies.
Okay.
Maybe this involves role-playing different scenarios and exploring different ways of framing, challenging student behaviors or difficult interactions with parents.
Mm.
And also, helping teachers develop this diverse toolkit of coping strategies,
Yeah.
both problem-focused and emotion-focused, and really fostering this proactive and thriving mindset,
Right.
that emphasizes purpose and agency and resilience.
So the takeaway here for anyone listening, whether you're an educator or you're in a completely different field, is that, the way that we interpret events really has a profound impact.
And our well-being.
Absolutely. And becoming aware of our own appraisal patterns,
Yeah.
particularly in those stressful interpersonal situations, that's really the crucial first step
Yeah, that's a great point.
to managing emotional exhaustion and really cultivating those reappraisal skills and those proactive coping strategies. Those are far more effective in the long run than just trying to suppress our feelings.
Yeah, that's such a powerful and universally applicable insight.
Yeah.
Think about it, take a moment to consider the judgments that you make, habitually in your own work or life that might be contributing to some of those unpleasant emotions.
This deep dive into this research on teacher burnout, it really offers a valuable framework for understanding and addressing emotional strain in any demanding environment.
Absolutely. It prompts us to ask, what are those automatic interpretations that I'm making? Are there alternative ways of viewing these situations?
Yeah, are you jumping to conclusions?
Are you jumping to conclusions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I be focusing more on proactive solutions
Instead of just reacting?
rather than just constantly reacting to problems?
That's a great point to end on. Maybe this week take some time to reflect on, some of those automatic mental assessments that you're making and see if there's another lens that you could view the situation through.
Yeah. It might make a real difference.
It might make a huge difference in your own emotional well-being and resilience.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening.